And thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Thomas, and welcome everyone. It's great to be in the company of an amazing panel here, who I'm going to introduce, as well as all our alumni and guests who are joining from around the world. I am excited to introduce dear friends and students. With us, we have Chris Sheppard, who's a head of the classics department at the Hackley School, which is a school based in New York. Chris is a classicist by training, and he got his MPhil at the University of Oxford, has worked in higher ed for a very long time, and is someone I always go back to get new, interesting ideas about teaching. He's one of the most creative thinkers I've seen in teaching, and I'm really excited to have him as a part of this conversation. We are also joined by Spencer Weinreich, who is joining us who is a member of the Harvard Society of Fellows. The Harvard Society of Fellows, for those of you who don't know, is one of the world's oldest and most prestigious postdoctoral programs based at Harvard University. And Spencer is a historian of science, and I encourage you to go look up his website. Has done amazing, groundbreaking work on the history of incarceration, and he got his bachelor's from Yale University, and then moved very far away to Princeton, New Jersey, to get his PhD just last year, and then has been at Harvard. Spencer has been teaching at Harvard over the past 1 year, and has had some very interesting experiences with AI that I bet we're going to hear more about. I'm also thrilled to be joined here by two alums from our network who have experience in education. Zana English, who was a Teach for America fellow and part of our Civic Tech cohort from earlier this year. Zana is joining us from Arkansas and has, I bet, a lot of interesting insights about ways in which AI is being used in classroom. And last but not the least, we have Apollinaire Abi, who is a research fellow at the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. And he is a Togolese scholar. He was an Equitech scholar from the class of 2022, and is a co-founder of NawiriTech, which provides data science education to young professionals in the African continent. And Apollinaire also will have interesting insights about ways in which AI is getting adopted in parts of the African continent. So welcome, everyone. I am going to get started with Chris. And I want to kind of frame this conversation as a fact-finding mission, as kind of trying to figure out what's really happening. There's obviously a ton of hype in the media. Not a day goes by when you open up the newspaper and you either hear that AI is going to, destroy the world or change everything about it. And as with realities, the reality is somewhere in between. I think AI is a very interesting tool. I think it has real benefits and impacts, but eventually it really depends on how it is used. And particularly in educational contexts, I think it's important to kind of interrogate how AI is going to change not just the way in which we teach in classrooms, but how we assess people and what the nature of assessments is going to look like. And also the kind of skill sets that I think will become important in the future as people learn to live with AI. And this can go back actually to ideas from humanities, where the focus has not really been more on skills, but on things like critical thinking, on having diverse perspectives, and I think it's very essential to have humanistic perspectives in the way in which AI is going to get embedded in the classroom. So with that, I actually want to begin with Chris. Chris, you teach high school students, middle school to high school students. If you can tell us a little bit about, and for all the speakers, if you can contextualize a little bit about your work, like who you teach and what you teach, and ways in which you're seeing the use of AI transforming classrooms. And we can sort of get started from there. Over to you, Chris.
Well, thank you, first off, so much, Abhilash, for inviting me. I feel so grateful and honored to be part of this panel discussion today, and very excited. And thank you to Thomas for kind of setting it up and coordinating, and for everybody who's here. This is a really wonderful way to spend a Saturday morning here in New York. And so to your question, I teach primarily high school. I'm the chair of Class 6 at the Hackley School in New York, as you mentioned. I teach mostly upper school students, the kind of full range of years from 9th grade to seniors. Most Latin and Greek classes tend to be pretty mixed in terms of the ages, which is really enjoyable as a teacher. I also teach in our middle school, and I have taught 6th grade for the last couple of years, and I'll be moving to 8th grade this year. For the past 6 summers, I've also taught in the summer program at Phillips Exeter Academy, and I teach there 1 upper school course and 3 middle school courses. So primarily rising 8th graders and rising 9th graders. And again, it's kind of classics, Latin and Greek, a lot of that, but also literature, history, civilization. And so I'll try to keep my remarks fairly brief to begin. I think that, I'd say that there's a lot of interest and excitement is certainly what I'm seeing around AI and experimentation. And I think, I guess this is, if I could get in a kind of shameless quote from classics. So I'll go to the choral ode in Sophocles' Antigone, where human beings are described with this adjective in Greek. There's one of my favorite Greek words, and it doesn't really have a translation in English. The word is deinos, and it means sort of wondrous, terrible, and clever, all at the same time. Again, if one can find a good English word that gets that in one word, let me know. I've been on the look for it, and I can't find one. But there's this kind of human beings are described in this sort of double-edged way. They're sort of, wondrous, but also terrible. That is a little bit of how I'm seeing AI unfold in classrooms, this kind of double-edgedness to it, where on the one hand, there's certainly a lot of curiosity, and I think that's true from students. I think it's also true from faculty in schools. I don't think we're seeing sort of straight out bans across the board. That there is, I think, lots of interest in how do we engage with this productively. And just to cite one example from my own field, I learned recently of a version of AI being trained to be a kind of spoken Latin interface that students who are learning Latin could sort of interact with in Latin, and to have as a kind of tutor assistant, if you like. And I thought that was pretty interesting and exciting. And it's, as far as I know, it's kind of mostly in beta testing at the moment. But to go back to Deinos, there's the other side of this as well, where I think I don't know that AI is creating new problems necessarily, but it is sort of maybe exacerbating existing problems. So things like academic integrity, right? And as somebody who teaches a subject that very much values the written word, we are certainly seeing a rise in particularly writing assignments where students are kind of turning to AI to kind of do the work. And I think one of the worrying trends there is the way in which some of that engagement strikes me as kind of a little bit uncritical. That is to say, kind of simply using what AI spits out, maybe iterating on it a couple times, but not having the sort of critical awareness to think about, okay, is this right? What about this is could be improved on, and so on. So I would say, to keep my remarks on the briefer side, hopefully, that there's a kind of double-edgedness in education at the moment.
I completely agree with the uncritical engagement with the technology. A small anecdote before we move to Spencer. We review a lot of applications at Equitech Futures, and a lot of people have obviously started using AI tools to write their applications and their essays as they are applying. Somehow, ChatGPT and other tools think that Equitech Futures is a financial trading company, given the name. And because of that, we get a lot of applications thinking that they are applying to a finance job. So I think the fact that people don't bother to read the output from AI is really interesting, and I would highly recommend not doing that when you are applying for jobs or engaging with AI in any capacity. Spence, you taught a course at Harvard this last semester. Tell us a little bit about how what that course was first, and how you saw undergraduates engage with AI.
Yeah, and I just want to echo all of Chris's thanks to everyone involved and to everyone here. So I taught a number of courses last year, and the one that I really sort of confronted AI was a research tutorial, which is a semester-long, very small methods course that is meant to teach upper-level students how to write a history research paper, from coming up with an idea all the way through to here's a 25-page paper that does all of the things that a history paper ought to do. And it's broken down week by week, different skills, different components of the assignments, lots of scaffolding, and so on. I want to sort of preface what I'm about to say with the fact that I am aware just how many kinds of AI there are and just how many different things they do. The one that I am confronting sort of week in, week out in the classroom is very much a certain kind of generative AI, mostly ChatGPT and the generative AI that is involved in tools like Grammarly, that students will use, and no doubt many people on this call have used, to tighten up their prose and make sure the commas are in the right place, et cetera, et cetera. But that's obviously not the only kind of AI. It's not the only kind of AI that is impacting on the higher education system. It's just the one that in a course on producing a research paper you encounter most often. If I had to say, what am I seeing? I think panic is actually not a bad word for what I am seeing at the higher ed sector. Not a course that I taught, but a course taught by someone I know. I will not give any details, but it was a large course, and somewhere around 1 in 4 students was caught using AI in direct violation of course policy to generate written assignments. And I don't think that the system is ready for that. Our academic integrity systems, whether it's at a undergraduate level, at a grade school level, are not built for a world in which 1 in 4 students is cheating. And whether we want to call it cheating or not, whether we need a new definition for academic integrity or dishonesty or whatever you want to call it, I don't know. But I know that this is a scale such as we have never seen. And it has all kinds of issues about detection and judgment, and who gets to decide what counts as a good use or not, that we have not seen before. And our systems are, I mean, literally, like, what committee is involved, how big is the committee, how long does it take, is not ready for this. And I have not seen really anywhere in higher education that I know of confronting that in a real way. In part, I think, because it manifests so differently. If you're looking at a humanities course where the project is write a long research paper, probably longer than the student has ever written before, versus I'm in a lab and I need help cleaning up this data or whatever it might be. And my understanding from colleagues and friends in more administrative roles in the universities is there is a night and day difference between how, say, someone in the chemistry department thinks about AI versus how someone in the history department thinks about AI. I think there have been attempts to kind of ride the wave. We just got an email from the Harvard administration about a new partnership with ChatGPT and a particular kind of ChatGPT EDU that they now have. And I'll just wrap up by saying this. I have a number of colleagues within history that are trying to find ways to integrate things like ChatGPT into their curricula and find ways that you can design an assignment such that you actually use ChatGPT to achieve some course outcome. I will acknowledge that I am a pretty deep skeptic of that and can talk about why if people are interested. My point I've often made to Chris, if you're going to train an AI to speak Latin to you, you have to already know enough Latin to do that training. And so your AI, whoever's designing it has to know what they're doing. But is that any guarantee that the person using it is then going to get to that level of Latin? Personally, I'm very dubious. And I've not yet seen an application of AI to the subject that I teach, which is history, that actually leads to students acquiring the skills of history. They may acquire skills of how to manipulate an AI, which is a perfectly good skill to have, but it's not actually my job. And I'm not qualified to do that job because I don't know how to manipulate it.
I want to touch on a couple of threads that you just brought up, which is and maybe as we progress in the conversation, we can get back to the second point. But the first point is intent. So when you have a technology available to students, you can have people want to use it just as a creative co-pilot. You could imagine Google search being a creative co-pilot and say, I want to go search for resources. That's a little bit like going to the library and trying to find resources. And the other is a tool basically saying, hey, I don't want to do this assignment. I just want to use ChatGPT to write my paper. And that is a fundamental kind of failure of the pedagogical process, because if you say the goal of pedagogy is to teach you how to think, how to write, that ends up being a fundamental sort of failure of the pedagogical process. So why are you even coming to Harvard to learn if that's what you're going to do? And I'm wondering where in that, and I think you hit upon something which is quite deep and profound, which is that I think systems around academic integrity were designed for ensuring that the pedagogical process is functioning the way in which it should be functioning. And then we, now are at a place where ChatGPT can actually append to that pedagogical process, but what we are seeing is not appending. It's kind of, just defeating the purpose of pedagogy. Can you speak a little bit to where you're seeing students apply it? Is it oh, I'm going to go think about a bunch of new creative ideas by, using ChatGPT as a co-pilot? Or is it I'm literally going to put in the question that was asked in the assignment and copy paste the stuff on the assignment?
More the latter, I'm sad to say. I'm just seeing a lot of uncritical use of it, and indeed very often the copy paste. And sometimes they even forget to do, as you were saying about applications, they forget to look. And so you get those little bits that say, well, as a language model, I can't do this, but what you might do is this, right? And I'm like, come on, people, help me out here. Give me something. I am seeing it a lot with, I'm seeing it being used as a sort of quick way to do to not have to do the skills of writing, is the way I would put it, right? As everyone here who's ever written an essay will know, organizing an essay, figuring out here's where I will start, here's what will come next, and what will come next is hard. And actually a big part of the work of writing a paper is figuring out, you have some ideas, what order do they go in? How do I get from one to the other? And it's a lot of things like that. Students are using it to do that thinking for them. And when you confront them about it, they say, but the ideas were mine. AI just told me how to put them together. And I almost think there's a misunderstanding of why it is we ask students to write essays and what skills it is they are supposed to acquire in the writing of an essay. That it's not just about the particular argument you're making, it's how you make that argument. And I think that I'm seeing it a lot in those, if you like, meta elements of writing. The one other thing I'll just say about that, which is not entirely related, but I was thinking about things we were saying at the beginning about sort of the diversity of voices and a lot of the work that Equitech Futures does. And I'm looking at this wonderful list in the chat of where everybody is from across the world, and no doubt coming from, you know, dozens of language backgrounds, of cultural backgrounds, with all kinds of amazing traditions of speech and writing and art and all the wonderful things. And one of the things that I don't think people are talking enough about with generative AI is monotony. AI is lowest common denominator sameness. And every single student you ever come across comes from some unique combination of backgrounds and will use language in a way particular to them because that's their life. That's where we all do it. And one of the things that I hate most about what gets spit out by something like ChatGPT or even Grammarly, in the way that it will rewrite and rewrite and rewrite towards an average that is nobody, is it flattens all that out. And it makes someone who comes from, I'm making this up, but, you know, who comes from, you know, the British Caribbean and will use language in a particular way because of that, sound exactly like someone who comes from, you know, Korea or France or wherever. And even if what it spit out was good, I would think that was a tragedy, but it's not.
Yeah, no, I want to come back to the flattening of ideas and you know, particularly from a global context, how that flattens it out, as well as language as a tool for thought in a bit, right? I mean, the idea that we forget that language is not something independent of thought, but it's a tool for thought, and how that affects thinking is important. But I want to, before that, Zana, I want to get to you in terms of how you are seeing AI being transformed in classrooms in a very different context than universities or high schools in New York, and what you're seeing as the trends in where you are working.
Thank you so very much, Abhilash, and also to echo what everyone has said. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm so excited to be with this group of amazing panelists today. I have had a lot of moments in this conversation where I was just nodding my head along. So just a little bit of background for me. I am a science teacher, so my background is in science. I taught 7 through 12 middle school and high school STEM science, particularly in the life science area. Now I have switched to doing data, so I spend a lot of my time in front of a screen analyzing data. And at my work at the American Experiment Project, I spend a lot of time working and looking at data from different sources to basically try and get new policy ideas out to the general public through my organization. And I still have a heart for education policy. And when I particularly think about how AI is being used in terms of science, AI literally fulfills the technology part of STEM. Now, when I was coming along and teaching science, I often did something called STEAM, which is the abbreviation of science, technology, engineering, art, and then mathematics, because I personally feel that there is a certain type of art, there's a certain type of creativity that is in science that you kind of need in order to kind of imagine these things. And now that I spend a lot of my time doing data, but even when I was in the classroom and we started using technology, because when I started in the classroom, technology became very much integrated due to COVID-19. we started moving away from paper and moving everything almost online and doing repositories, which for me, I was very happy to have that, because with the use of technology, and particularly what I tend to see from teachers who are using technology like AI, a lot of them like the idea of being able to cut down on their grading. Now, there have been a couple of issues with doing that, but the ability to have instantaneous feedback, the ability to kind of be able to almost within moments find out exactly where your students are and even be able to customize lessons for students. For me, thinking about how that helps students and teachers, particularly thinking about my time in the classroom of using to spend like maybe 4 hours or more grading. And so as I was a science teacher, I also had to do lab work. So that meant I had to also do papers and go through labs and say to myself, okay, how was the student? Does the student have an understanding of the experiment? My focus was not so much, sometimes it wasn't necessarily did they do it correctly, but could they explain to me why this project wasn't done correctly? And that gave them points as well. For me, when I think about how AI is being used, I cannot, there was someone who said that they are concerned about the flattening of voices and the dearth of thoughts there. And I cannot begin to say, yes, I 110% agree. In particular with science, I find science to be kind of a marriage of math and reading and the skills that you're trying to teach, with the additional aspect of critical thinking. Science in this particular is a way of trying to help people understand the world around them. And artificial intelligence is a means of understanding the world around them. But what I am deeply concerned about, as people say, is that people are just putting questions into the generative AI and not thinking any for themselves anymore. What I have seen, or what some teachers have tried to encourage with trying to integrate AI into their classroom as science teachers, because AI is a product of science, is trying to basically navigate or try to teach students how to prompt the AI to explain these concepts to them, which I think does kind of help out. And that does kind of help a student understand, like, hey, I got this wrong. Can you explain to me why? But it is the simple fact of the matter that a lot of students are kind of, even when I think about my own students, most of my students were very much like, what's the answer? My students call me Miss E. They're like, Miss E, what's the answer? And I was like, oh, sweetheart, no. It's not about what's the answer. It's like, how do we get to the answer? Particularly with math. I think a lot about math, of how many different ways there can be to get the correct mathematical answer. There are different steps that you could take, but sometimes, and recently I came across a new AI tool that they're debuting that would help students do math. And my first, it was like, oh, cool, a new technology. Of course, I'm a science teacher. I like technology. But then the very next thought was, how is this AI going to work or help the student get to the correct answer? Because I remember when I was in school, my teachers had a process for me of how to get to that answer. Now it's the AI spitting out. And yes, the AI can explain the answer, but it's almost like, if we're going to continue to use this, one of the things I am very much concerned about, or two things, is how are we going to kind of be intentional with our AI usage? Because it can be used. It can be very helpful. Like I said, it's a technology. This is something that I do think that is important for students and people to understand how to use. But I am worried about the issue of critical thought, or the ability that's going to take away for students to begin to try and work with those problems. Now, of course, there's going to be boons for the teacher. And my second thing is also data. So you have to input information into the artificial intelligence. And even in my own process of using technology in the classroom, data is coming from the students, and that is telling whoever's collecting that information about who that student is. One of the things I think about a lot in my terms as a teacher is that kind of motivated me, is that here in the United States of America, by third grade, we can determine by a student's third grade reading levels how many beds in prison that we're going to need to build. And that is something that we have figured out through data and collecting information. As someone who's now on the data side, that is something that deeply concerns me. I think a lot about how it could be used positively to help students improve their information and get them to the next point. But I'm also now worried about, what does that mean when we're collecting this information, using this scientific information, and now who's using it? And so for me, when I think about artificial intelligence and its impact on classrooms, I want to go ahead with what Chris said. It's very much a double-edged sword, and there are some problems that it is exacerbating, but there are also, I would say, argue some new problems, because now we're thinking about how that data is being collected, and particularly with students, children, that is basically determining their futures before they even have an idea of what their futures are going to look like. And that's being, in a sense, determined arbitrarily by people who are collecting this information and how they're obtaining this information. So those are my 2 cents. I'm going to stop talking now, because I really would like to hear a lot of other people's discussion on this, but this is kind of where I have kind of flattened out on my my thoughts on artificial intelligence in the classroom.
And thank you, Zana, so much for that perspective. And I want to go to Apollinaire, but I want to come back to this recurring theme of the fact that, this is a technology which is fundamentally different in terms of it becoming kind of a cognitive infrastructure. It's like a cognitive crutch. And so what does that mean? And I've been fascinated by sort of thinking about ways in which AI is just going to affect thinking, particularly for young learners. And I want to come back to that. But Apollinaire, you've been doing a lot of work outside of the US, and I'm curious to hear about your perspectives on how you are seeing AI be used or not be used, and in terms of awareness in different contexts around these tools in the classroom.
Thank you, Abhilash. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you to everybody who spoke before me. Amazing ideas coming out, and I'm hoping to add something to this great discussion. So what I do mainly, I have 2 ways in which I teach people, and mainly I teach science, and by science I mean data analysis and a bit of AI. And the main group that I teach is through NawiriTech, where we get young professionals in all over Africa who are interested to learn a little bit of data science, so that they can understand how data is used in their work, even though they do not have any background in mathematics or coding. Right? So we do get a very interesting sample, in the sense that these people come in without let's say, a good understanding of mathematics, but want to reach their goal of understanding how to interpret data and work with Python and such things. And the way that I see AI being used is very disappointing and deceiving for them, in the way that for this current program that we had, which just finished like 2 weeks ago, we got a lot of students who came in focusing on the outcome of the course rather than what we are going to teach them. Because if you go to ChatGPT, for instance, and ask it any question about data analysis, it's going to give you the objective, like what you need to be able to do as a data analyst, right? So we got a lot of students who came in, and throughout the 12 weeks of learning, they were really just focusing on what's the point of all what we're learning, like not in the sense that, not in a curious way, but I just want to know how to run this model, how to build a model that can do what I need to do, because that's what a data analyst is supposed to be, right? And there is so little focus on what we're teaching. That is the process, the thinking, and especially the mathematics behind data analysis. So when that happens, of course, for us, it was a bit frustrating, because students weren't really trying at all to understand what we're teaching. When we're trying to teach them basic things in mathematics, they weren't really focusing at all, because they had this kind of idea that they could simply run a model, explain the model to people and get away with it. But that's not how it works. And especially if you do understand data analysis, if you do understand mathematics, it's very easy to spot when someone is saying something that I'll qualify as rubbish, right? It's very easy to point that out, and they do not understand that. Yet they do not care at all to focus on the process, the build-up process, getting this model. So that's one way we have really seen the effect of AI. Unlike our previous programs where people are really curious, questioning every single step, trying to understand why are we getting this result, how is this model built. In the very previous program, after like AI came around, all we have seen is people willing to just know the model and not worry about how the model is built. And I think the second way that we have really seen AI, and I think for me, this was the biggest problem actually, was students being confident beyond their knowledge. That is, they really feel like they do know the concept. And I've had students really even like oppose my teaching in class, right? When I would just say simple concept, like, no, that's not it. I'm like, well, you got at this point, you know, kind of listen to the teacher and not what the AI told you, because it can make mistakes, right? So that was a big problem. And at the end of the program, in 12 weeks, you know, our goal is to take a student from no knowledge in mathematics to coding and interpreting data. But 12 weeks later, we got students who didn't really understand the mathematics and were not even didn't hesitate to tell us that they do not really like maths, which is an honest opinion for many people. However, the same student ended up as a final project presenting a machine learning model, which to this point, I'm still surprised because I do not understand how they learned it, because I didn't teach them that. And none of the four teachers that we have the program, none of us really taught them, you know, how to build a machine learning model, even though we discuss machine learning, of course, for the sake of knowing how to use it to avoid, you know, this mistake. But we end up having at least one student presenting their project, which was a machine learning model. And 2 weeks before the final presentation, the student didn't come for feedback from any of us. That means that they were completely relying on another source. And my bet is as good as anyone's bet. It's definitely going to be a large language model, right? So that kind of overconfidence really deceives the point of what we're trying to do, because 2 weeks now, and I still question myself every day, how did they build that model? Do they understand what the model is doing? They told me that they do not really understand the mathematics, but end up with a machine learning model, which I'm still like, at the end of the day, did I really do what I was supposed to do? Did I really teach them anything good? So yeah, that's something that I get. And my experience with teaching young high school students in Togo has been a little different. I think that was actually a very interesting pool. That's a project that Abhilash and I worked on, where like in Togo, for instance, people are not really aware of ChatGPT. And Togo is a small country in West Africa, and people are not really aware of ChatGPT and other AI tools. And teaching them was exciting because they were more curious. They were more willing to know what it is, mainly because many people just think AI is a magic tool. And when you get them from that idea of it's a magic tool to them understanding that it's a logical process based on something which is as simple as statistics, then they get more curious. They get really engaged in learning. And I found that to be more interesting to teach. Yeah, thank you.
Really. Spence, you have something. Yeah.
I something that Apollinaire just said just sort of chimed with me about confidence. Which I think it's one of these paradoxes of what I've seen with AI and education. On the one hand, exactly as Apollinaire says, right, you get this unthinking trust of whatever the computer program spits out, that must be right because the machine told me that's what it was. And of course, we all know very often it isn't right. But I think kind of, you know, the underside of that trust is a lack of trust in themselves. You know, I see so often AI being resorted to by students because they don't feel able to, you know, whether it's plan an essay or crunch the numbers or work out this mathematical problem themselves. And I think, you know, there is that, it's a little bit like what Zana was saying about, you know, tell me the answer. It's like there's an uncertainty and a anxiety of, I mean, I think for us as educators, for us as people who care about education, obviously skills is hugely important, and getting students to know, okay, here's a mathematical problem you haven't seen before. How do we go about tackling it? What tools do you have in your bag? But it's also something one level deeper than that, which is trust that you have those tools. Trust that you can do this, and you don't need the machine to do it for you, because you can do it. And I am sad to say that I think when I think about the students that I encountered who then used AI, the matchup with who, as far as I could tell as their instructor, felt least confident in their abilities with language, with writing, with organizing thought, and so on, it's one-to-one. Those are the students that reach for it. And so I think this issue of confidence is, I think a kind of through line to everything we've all been saying.
And I mean, this is a deep and profound sort of commentary on the educational system itself. Like, if you talk about whether that's Harvard, whether that is NawiriTech, whether that is a school in Arkansas, the goal, and we see that a lot with people coming in and saying, hey, give me this bunch of skills, and then I'm going to go out in the world and find a job, which has been kind of the traditional way in which higher ed and school education over the past 30 years maybe has evolved around the world, where and that has led to all kinds of issues like grade inflation at universities, even at elite universities, right? And particularly maybe at elite universities. And so there, the goal then becomes like, hey, if someone can help, if there's a tool that can help me get to that destination faster, quicker, I'll just go take that destination faster and quicker. Whereas we as a society haven't quite impressed upon the conversation of like, no, actually, that's not the point. The point is about reflection. The point is about really understanding, as Apollinaire was saying, how you get to these answers and thinking critically about these answers. And that, I think, every time I talk about the value of critical thinking, et cetera, in places, you can see a lot of people's like eyes glaze over a little bit. I'm like, yeah. It's like, one of those education Luddites like talking about the value of critical thinking. But if anything, AI has kind of really bubbled that up as to being a core problem of how we communicate the value of education. And for the final sort of round of comments that I want to get is, I want to kind of come up with or I want to propose a slightly debatable opinion. I would say, like, I think the fact that what our goal is, like David Foster Wallace used to say, like, the goal of education should be to teach people how to think, and teaching people how to think is a task that we haven't quite leaned into as much as educators, whether that's at the school level or at the college level. I think AI is just going to make that conversation come front and center. And one way to sort of, communicate this idea is to kind of impress upon people that language is a tool for thought. Like my colleague Kritika always keeps on saying, writing is a tool through which you are able to extend the life of a thought, and being able to do that really, convincing people that, hey, writing yourself is going to help you come up with these ideas better is something that that they need to kind of grapple with as they are using AI. And I'm wondering how you think that conversation, whether that conversation needs to happen or whether that conversation is already happening, and what you think needs to change for this kind of new wave of AI innovations to enter into the classroom and really be meaningful in some way. And I'm going to go back in the sequence to Chris.
Yeah, I think first off, I just want to say how much I'm enjoying this conversation and all of the great ideas that have been shared. I want to come back to, Zana, your point about this sort of the teacher often being put in the role of the answer machine. And as teachers, right, the work of resisting that, particularly, I think this is where I'm certainly not a math teacher, but I would like to think that maybe teaching ancient languages and math kind of align in this way, that yeah, there are sort of right answers that we're trying to get to, right? In Latin, that's a dative case, not an accusative case, and so on. But there are many ways in which we can get there. And so this idea of how do we value the process? And I think, Abhilash, your great question to me is about communication of values. And so often discussions about education are that. And I think this is where the language of efficiency and I think the alignment of technology generally and AI specifically with this promise of efficiency is really not serving us well. I don't think that education is always, or even maybe even indeed often, an efficient process. That actually there's value in right kind of slowing down. I think we talk about the skills of critical thinking, and Spence, your point about those sort of, and Apollinaire about kind of confidence, right, and the way in which you see the students kind of who are lacking confidence reach to that. To me, that speaks of the value of teaching students to grapple with uncertainty, right? To actually to sit with that for a moment, right? Because before we can begin to plan the essay and sort of go on, we have to sort of just sit with that moment of, oh dear, this is a big task, and what are the ways in which I can do this? And I think this is just one area in which, again, the language, that's to me not an efficient process, and deliberately, and there's value in it not being an efficient process, actually, right? And so I think that's one of the things that going forward I'd love to see, is this move away from this language of, efficiency, that whatever it is we're doing in education, right, for some reason we've come to value that whatever it is we're doing, we get there quickly. Why? And I think, I don't know where AI comes into this, but to me, it seems that is one of the conceptual moves that we need to make. I think where language, and Abhilash, to come back to your point about writing as an extension of thought, and I have definitely found myself saying to students that, when I've taught writing and done writing assignments, that it's not so much this idea that we write to get what's in our head out on a piece of paper that's already formed. In fact, we write to figure out what it is we're thinking. Right, that it is one of these great tools to help us clarify our thinking in that regard. And so what I see, just to bring this back to the classroom and close with that, certainly one of the effects already that we're seeing of AI is a lot more focus on in-class writing. And actually, that's something I've done myself in my own classes, is to just kind of remove the possibility and to dedicate time to write in class, to reflect in class, to share, to sort of scaffold, as is the common term in teaching, right? That process of sitting with uncertainty. Okay, we're going to do that together in the classroom, right? And then we can partner up and talk about it. And I wonder if that might be a direction that for writing-based assignments that we see. I think when you're talking about giant research papers, obviously that's a little harder to do. But certainly at the level I work at, and in Latin, we do have the benefit of being able to do a lot of in-class work, and I see myself continuing that in the future.
Yeah, I really love that. And again, that kind of requires the kind of institutional structures of small classrooms, teacher-student ratios where that makes sense. And I think that's going to be a huge deal. And I want to go to Spence next, but something that I've been thinking about that just came to me was I've been thinking about the ideas of some of these media theorists from the last century, folks like Marshall McLuhan, who used to say, the medium is the message. And I think the way in which I think these lessons are going to fall into AI. I mean, the idea basically there was, the fact that you are consuming television, the fact that technology is neutral, whether you're consuming, CNN or Fox News, that's different. The fact that you're consuming, technology, the television as a medium is irrelevant. And basically, a lot of folks challenged that question and said, no, the way through which you are getting that information has a profound difference in the way in which you think. The kind of immediacy of television is very different than the kind of deliberation of reading a newspaper, and it shapes the style of thought. And we've seen this in the case of social media, the way in which Twitter affects the way in which we think, the way in which, other tools affect. And I think AI is going to have a similar kind of an impact where it's going to affect the way in which we think purely by the nature of the technology that it is. And we've talked about some elements of that, right? The kind of flattening of and the kind of homogenization of thought in some ways. I think it's very important to kind of keep that in mind. I'll just drop a great article by Ezra Klein on this topic, and of course in the larger media context, but I've been thinking a lot about how that relates to the use of AI in writing. Spence.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, I mean, I used to say, I'm not asking students to write a research paper because what I really want to do with my weekend is read a dozen 25-page papers on assorted topics in the history of science. Now, that is very often what I do with my weekend, but it's about, I think, the skills that go into designing, writing, editing, refining one of those papers is a skill worth having. Whether or not you want to become a historian, whether or not you're ever going to do anything with that paper in future or not. Going back to something I said earlier, and I'm very conscious about, it's a narrow set of AIs that I'm talking about, and it's a narrow set of disciplines that I'm talking about. But I do fear that in the scramble, basically, if you can't beat them, join them, that higher education is basically saying, look, this is going to be used whether we like it or not. So this is the world that our students live in and will then go out to be adults in. And so we better use it. I think I have seen some of my colleagues, as I would see it, retreating from the idea that actually the tools of our discipline are worthwhile, even if an AI can sort of approximate them. And redesigning syllabi where suddenly the course assignments have nothing to do with thinking about the past, thinking about how we know about the past, thinking about how do you make an argument about something you weren't there to see and you don't have all the information, like the core skills of being a historian. The assignments are all about AI. And it's not that that's not an interesting question and an interesting set of skills to have, but they're not historical skills. And the only other thing I'll say about that, I fear very much, it in part, and I think it's related to some of the things that both Zana and Chris have been talking about sort of just get me to the answer as quick as I can, but also thinking about language as a medium of thought. And I like your invocation of Marshall McLuhan, and the medium is the message. One of the things I'm really noticing when I'm reading students writing, even if they're not using AI, frankly, is I don't feel the students are reading much. I don't mean like, in part, this is the world they've grown up in, right? Just a lot more is on a screen, and a lot more of their upbringing, a lot more of whatever they consume comes through a digital medium of one kind or another. A visual medium of one kind or another, television, what have you. But I think one of the things that means is that when they get to age 20 or age 30 or age 40, the amount of written prose they have consumed, long form prose, a novel, is lower than kind of at any point since mass literacy became a reality. And getting back to something I said earlier about in order to teach an AI to speak Latin, you have to already know Latin. I think one of the reasons this is flattening out the way people use language is because the students who are using it that way don't have a store of language of their own to say, here's what my voice sounds like. Here's how I want to write and how I'm going to express my thoughts. And you know, it sounds pretty hackneyed and kind of almost naive, I suppose. But for me, I don't want to say the antidote, because I don't think we're going to get rid of AI, and I'm not saying that's the world I want to live in. But the antidote to the unthinking, uncritical use of AI, you know, is what our teachers taught us. It's read and write. It's think. It's do the work. And ironically, right, if you spend some of your free time reading novels or history, whatever you like to read, I'm not saying it has to be a novel, you will be better at using the large language model. You will be better at using the AI because you will have a much broader frame of reference for thinking about how to do things with language, how to do things with words, as the philosopher said. And what breaks my heart in a way is how often I have gotten written work from students that they think the superficially professional and superficially sort of academic voice of what ChatGPT spits out is good writing. And I fear a world in which students are writing that way, not because they used AI to generate their prose, but because that's the only prose they know. And that does make me sound very conservative, and you know, we must teach the classics and all the rest of it. And maybe I am. But I don't think it's just, you know, read, you know, Jane Austen or something. I think it's read everything. You know, read current literature, read poetry, listen to, you know, any kind of music you like that's using language in interesting ways. Because I don't know, I think, yeah, I really like the use of McLuhan there, that we've retreated to a world in which we think the medium isn't the message. And I think that was wrong when we were talking about television, and I think it's wrong when we're talking about AI.
On that note, that's a wonderful reflection to kind of bookend this conversation. Unfortunately, we're at time for the discussion, but I want to make sure that we have time for some questions, and I hope the panelists have some time to stick around for some questions. If we can maybe turn off the